Hi, this is Artifacts of Mars. I'm going to do something a little different this time and talk about these foolish sun shield schemes that we see a bunch of scientists planning to implement. These schemes, as we'll see, will result in hundreds of millions, and probably more like billions of us dead. And there's plenty of evidence out there to support that's what exactly these maniac elitists want. The first consequence is that people may well freeze to death in their homes. If the cooling these people achieve is severe enough, our poles may well be much like those of Mars, perhaps 200 degrees below zero. In Canada, Siberia, Alaska, we may be seeing temperatures so harsh that no life can live there. It's a very real possibility. Here in the Northeast, in western New York where I live, we've just been through a very severe winter. And this winter is not over yet. It's been Arctic air all the time, all the way. Now, Northeast could wind up being perhaps 100 degrees below zero at night. It's hard to say with their models what exactly is going to happen. But what I can say is our winters have been severe and will be intolerable in the so-called temperate zones if these maniacs are allowed to finish their plans. Another thing that will happen as a result of one of these schemes, if they're successful, will be mass starvation due to reduced crop yields. Now, there's a direct causal relationship between the amount of sunlight a plant receives and how much food it can produce. Different plants, of course, take different amounts of sunlight, but most food crop plants are designed, if you will, to take direct sunlight. You reduce the sunlight, you reduce the amount of food a photosynthetic plant can make. It's a direct relationship. There's nothing to argue about there. If the plant has to take in sunlight in order to manufacture carbohydrates that are its food and therefore ours. The less the sunlight, the less photosynthesis that can go on. This is not an arguable point. This is plant science 101. So these lunatic scientists will cause mass starvation due to crop yields being reduced. But it gets worse. Another consequence adding to the mass starvation is the fact that livestock will starve or at least be severely reduced. Why? Because their food is no different than the green plants that we eat. They may not eat broccoli and cauliflower and all that, but their feed is dependent on sunlight as well. So livestock will be reduced because they will have less food because their plants that they eat will be able to produce less food for them to eat, and thus they will produce less food for us to eat. Sorry, you vegetarians, but many of us do love meat. The truth is that all agriculture will suffer. Whether you're talking about the growing of crops like cotton and flax to make clothing out of, or you're talking about growing and harvesting trees, the reduced amount of sunlight will reduce those as well, because they require the same amount of sunlight that other plants do. You reduce it, they're going to grow more slowly. So we might even have much less wood to harvest, along with all other woes that these lunatic plans will create. And none of this is speculation. This will happen if these scientists are successful. It has to happen because it's simple physics. Less energy means less growth. There's nothing to argue about there. The next thing that this will cause will be reduced oxygen and elevated CO2 levels. The reason this is very complex. We have oceanic phytoplankton, which are the tiny microscopic plants that produce oxygen and scrub the atmosphere of CO2. It isn't so much forests that provide oxygen as it is these tiny microscopic plants. Now, you reduce the light to them, they're going to produce less oxygen. There will be fewer of them growing, and thus they won't be able to scrub the atmosphere of CO2. It's a direct causal relationship. It will also reduce the amount of food in the oceans because, once again, everything depends upon photosynthetic plants for food. Virtually every life form on Earth depends on plants. You reduce the light, you reduce the phytoplankton, more CO2, less oxygen, we could wind up being asphyxiated. Another thing that is simply common sense is that people will use more lighting. If you reduce the amount of sunlight, there'll be less sunlight for people to read by, cook by, do whatever. And once again, you're going to have more CO2 added because people are going to turn on the lights. This is a direct causal relationship. There's nothing to argue about. So, at the same time, the ocean phytoplankton are being reduced, scrubbing the atmosphere less and less of CO2. More people will be adding CO2. So the maniacal plans of these scientists will backfire. This is not arguable. This is a direct causal relationship. Finally, back a few years ago, there was a maniac scientist from Texas University who said that he basically wished that the AIDS virus was more like Ebola, so that we could have mass extermination of human beings. I'm not going to mention this individual's name. Most of you probably know who he is. It really isn't necessary. But he was applauded by students and scientists alike. That shows you their mindset. To borrow a line from Star Trek The Next Generation, the episode Neutral Zone, I'm going to emulate what Mr. Worf said. They believe that you and I are a waste of skin. They believe that the common people are useless feeders, and they would like nothing else but to wipe us out. These people are dangerously mentally ill, and should, in my opinion, be thrown into mental hospitals permanently. Anybody who would do something like this, anybody who would suggest that AIDS should be more like Ebola, these are dangerous maniacs, and they should be locked up in mental hospitals for the rest of their natural lives. We are in far more danger from them than we are from any climate change. I thank you for your kind attention. This is Artifacts of Mars. I hope to get back to my research eventually. Thank you and have a good night.